She thought transferring to an elite school would be a fresh start, but when the first slur hit her ears, she realized it was just the beginning of a war. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments from where are you watching this video. Lena and Marco Vasquez stood at the gates of Stonebridge Prep, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. They had always dreamed of attending an elite school, but the reality of their new environment felt like stepping into a lion's den. The polished brick buildings loomed above them, casting long shadows over the neatly manicured lawns, and the whispers of students echoed in the air like a warning bell. "Look at them!" a voice sneered from the crowd, and Lena felt the weight of judgment settle on her shoulders. Tyler Winslow, the self-proclaimed king of the school, stood at the center of a group of boys, his smirk wide and mocking. The twins exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They were ready for whatever came next. As they walked through the halls, the stairs followed them like a spotlight, illuminating their differences in a place that thrived on conformity. The laughter that erupted around them was sharp and cruel, a reminder that they were not welcome. Marco's locker was vandalized on the first day, slurs scrawled across the metal in bold, ugly letters. Lena's heart raced, but she kept her head high, refusing to show weakness. Their father, Eduardo, had prepared them for this. A former Marine, he had instilled in them the values of strength and resilience. "Never back down," he had said, his voice steady and unwavering. "You fight for what's right, and you never let them see you break." But as the days turned into weeks, the bullying escalated. Food was thrown at them in the cafeteria, and their books were stolen and tossed around like toys. Teachers turned a blind eye, their indifference a silent endorsement of the cruelty that thrived within the school's walls. One afternoon, as Marco sat alone at a table, Tyler approached with his usual entourage. "What's the matter, Vasquez? Can't handle a little fun?" he taunted, knocking Marco's tray to the floor. The cafeteria erupted in laughter, but Marco remained silent, his jaw clenched. Lena watched from a distance, her heart racing as she sensed the tension building. Then, in a moment that would change everything, Marco straightened his back and locked eyes with Tyler. "You hit like you're scared of your own shadow," he said, his voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter shifted, turning from mockery to surprise. Tyler's face darkened, and he lunged forward, but Marco was ready. In that instant, the twins felt the shift. The air crackled with anticipation as Marco sidestepped Tyler's attack, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. "You done?" he growled, his voice low and fierce. The cafeteria fell silent, the shock of the moment hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Lena stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Next one of you touches my brother, you answer to me," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension. The crowd watched in awe as the twins stood united, their bond unbreakable in the face of adversity. The fight that followed was swift and decisive. Marco moved with precision, his training evident as he pinned Tyler to the ground. Lena took on two of Tyler's lackeys, her movements fluid and powerful, leaving one whimpering on the floor. The cafeteria erupted into chaos, but it was a different kind of chaos, one filled with respect rather than ridicule. As they walked away from the scene, the twins felt a surge of empowerment. They had stood their ground, refusing to be victims any longer. The whispers that had once followed them now transformed into murmurs of admiration. They were no longer just the new kids. They were warriors in their own right. But the battle was far from over. The school administration would not take kindly to their defiance, and the consequences of their actions loomed on the horizon. Yet as Lena and Marco exchanged determined glances, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next. They had ignited a spark, and they would not let it die. How long can you endure before you break? For Lena and Marco, the answer was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. The days at Stonebridge Prep dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The initial excitement of a new school had faded, replaced by a suffocating atmosphere of hostility. The twins had hoped for a chance to prove themselves, to show that they belonged, but instead they found themselves trapped in a cycle of relentless bullying. Tyler Winslow and his crew escalated their attacks, turning the hallways into a gauntlet of taunts and jeers. It started with whispers, the kind that slithered through the air like poison. Look at the Vasquez twins, they would say, their voices dripping with disdain. What are they even doing here? The laughter that followed was sharp, cutting through Lena and Marco like a knife. Their lockers became a canvas for hate, vandalized with slurs that left them feeling exposed and vulnerable. Each morning they would approach their lockers with a sense of dread, bracing themselves for the sight of ugly words scrawled across the metal. The teachers, who were supposed to protect them, turned a blind eye, their indifference a silent endorsement of the cruelty that thrived within the school's walls. One afternoon, as they sat in the cafeteria, the tension reached a boiling point. Marco had just taken a seat when Tyler and his friends approached, their smirks wide and mocking. "What's the matter, Vasquez? Can't handle a little fun?" Tyler taunted, knocking Marco's tray to the floor. The cafeteria erupted in laughter, but Marco remained silent, his jaw clenched tight. Lena watched, her heart racing as she sensed the storm brewing inside her brother. She could see the way his fingers curled into fists, the way his body tensed as he fought to control his anger. But he didn't swing. Instead, he straightened, locking eyes with Tyler, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You hit like you're scared of your own shadow." The laughter shifted, turning from mockery to surprise. Tyler's face darkened, and he lunged forward, but Marco was ready. In that moment, the twins felt the shift. The air crackled with anticipation as Marco sidestepped Tyler's attack, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. "You done?" he growled, his voice low and fierce. The cafeteria fell silent, the shock of the moment hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Lena stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Next one of you touches my brother, you answer to me," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension. The crowd watched in awe as the twins stood united, their bond unbreakable in the face of adversity. But the fight was far from over. The school administration would not take kindly to their defiance, and the consequences of their actions loomed on the horizon. Yet as Lena and Marco exchanged determined glances, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next. They had ignited a spark, and they would not let it die. The pressure was building, and they could feel it in every glance, every whisper that followed them through the halls. The weight of the bullying pressed down on them like a heavy blanket, but they refused to let it crush their spirits. They had been raised to stand tall, to fight for what was right, and they would not back down now. As the days passed, the bullying continued, but so did their resolve. They trained in secret, honing their skills, preparing for the inevitable confrontation that they knew was coming. They would not be victims any longer. They would fight back, not just for themselves, but for every student who had ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty. The breaking point was approaching, and they could feel it in the air. The tension was palpable, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. They were ready to unleash their fury, to show Tyler and his crew that they were not to be underestimated. They would stand their ground, and they would fight. They thought they could break us, but they had no idea what we were capable of. The day of reckoning arrived with a palpable tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Lena and Marco entered the cafeteria, their hearts pounding, knowing that the moment they had been preparing for was finally here. The whispers and laughter that usually accompanied their entrance were replaced by a heavy silence, as if the entire room was holding its breath in anticipation. Tyler Winslow was already there, leaning against the wall with his usual swagger, flanked by his loyal followers. His eyes glinted with malice as he spotted the twins. "Look who decided to show up," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Ready for another round of humiliation?" Lena felt the fire ignite within her. She exchanged a quick glance with Marco, and in that moment, they both knew they were ready. They had endured enough. It was time to take a stand. As they approached the lunch line, Tyler made his move. He shoved Marco hard, sending him stumbling into the table. The cafeteria erupted into laughter, but this time Marco didn't hesitate. He regained his balance, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face Tyler. "You think that's funny?" he shot back, his voice steady and strong. Tyler smirked, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What are you going to do about it?" he taunted, stepping closer, his friends egging him on. In that instant, Marco felt a surge of adrenaline. He sidestepped Tyler's next move, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back with a swift, practiced motion. The cafeteria fell silent, the shock of the moment hanging in the air. You done? Marco growled, his voice low and fierce. Lena stepped forward, her presence commanding. Next one of you touches my brother, you answer to me, she declared, her eyes blazing with determination. The crowd watched in awe as the twins stood united, their bond unbreakable in the face of adversity. Tyler's friends hesitated, their bravado faltering as they witnessed the unexpected turn of events. Marco tightened his grip, and for the first time Tyler looked vulnerable. You think you can just push us around? Marco challenged, his voice steady. Not anymore. With a sudden burst of energy, Tyler lunged forward, but Marco was ready. He dodged the attack, countering with a sharp elbow to Tyler's ribs that sent him staggering back. The cafeteria erupted into chaos, students shouting and scrambling to get a better view of the unfolding fight. Lena didn't wait for an invitation. She moved with precision, taking on two of Tyler's lackeys who had rushed to defend their leader. With a swift kick, she sent one crashing to the ground, while her other opponent found himself on the receiving end of a well-placed punch. The crowd gasped, the shock of the twins' unexpected ferocity electrifying the air. As Marco grappled with Tyler, the fight became a whirlwind of movement. Marco's training kicked in, each strike and counter flowing seamlessly as he pinned Tyler to the ground. You've had every chance to walk away, Marco said, his breath steady, but you kept coming. The cafeteria was alive with energy, students cheering and shouting, their loyalties shifting as they witnessed the twins reclaim their power. Tyler struggled beneath Marco, his bravado crumbling as he realized he was no longer in control. Lena stood beside her brother, her fist clenched and ready. This ends now, she declared, her voice cutting through the noise. The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. With one final push, Marco pinned Tyler down, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. You thought you could break us, he said, his voice low and fierce. But you were wrong. As the fight reached its climax, the twins stood victorious, their bodies poised and strong. They had faced the storm and emerged unbroken, their spirits ignited by the fire of their shared struggle. But even as they basked in the moment, they knew this was just the beginning. The school administration would not take kindly to their defiance, and the consequences of their actions loomed on the horizon. Yet as Lena and Marco exchanged determined glances, they understood that they had ignited a spark that would not be easily extinguished. They had fought back, not just for themselves, but for every student who had ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty. The fight was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next. They thought they could silence us, but the truth has a way of breaking free. In the aftermath of the fight, the atmosphere at Stonebridge Prep shifted dramatically. The cafeteria buzzed with whispers, students exchanging glances filled with a mix of awe and fear. Lena and Marco had stood their ground, and the entire school had witnessed it. But with victory came the inevitable fallout, and the twins knew they would have to face the consequences of their actions. The principal, Mr. Thompson, called an emergency meeting. The tension in the air was thick as Lena and Marco entered his office, their hearts pounding. They had prepared for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare them for the weight of the scrutiny they were about to face. Your actions today were unacceptable, Mr. Thompson began, his voice stern. Fighting is against school policy, and we cannot condone such behavior. Lena felt her stomach twist. We were defending ourselves, she replied, her voice steady despite the rising tide of anger within her. Tyler and his friends have been bullying us since we arrived. We didn't start this fight. Mr. Thompson's expression hardened. That may be true, but the school cannot take sides. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. Marco clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. You didn't see what happened. You didn't hear the things they said to us. We had no choice. The principal's gaze flickered, but he remained unmoved. I understand your frustration, but we have to follow protocol. You both will be suspended for a week. Lena's heart sank. Suspended for defending ourselves? That's the decision, Mr. Thompson replied, his tone final. As they left the office, the weight of the suspension hung heavy on their shoulders. They had fought back, but now it felt like they were being punished for it. The halls of Stonebridge Prep, once filled with laughter and camaraderie, now felt like a prison. But the twins were not alone. Word of their fight had spread like wildfire, and soon students began to rally around them. Those who had once stood by in silence now approached Lena and Marco with words of support. "You showed them," one girl said, her eyes shining with admiration. "I wish I had your courage." The tide was turning, and the twins could feel it. They had ignited something within their peers, a spark of defiance against the bullying that had long gone unchecked. Meanwhile, Tyler's parents were not taking the news of their son's defeat lightly. They stormed into the school, demanding to speak with the principal. "Our son is the victim here," Tyler's mother shouted, her voice echoing through the halls. "You can't just let those two get away with this." Mr. Thompson met with them, but the evidence was clear. Security footage from the cafeteria had captured the entire incident, and it painted a different picture than the one Tyler's parents were trying to sell. As the days passed, the twins found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Students began to speak out against the bullying culture at Stonebridge Prep, sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The administration could no longer ignore the problem. Eduardo Vasquez, their father, arrived at the school, his presence commanding respect. Dressed in his Marine uniform, he stood tall and unwavering as he addressed the gathered students. "You have the right to stand up for yourselves," he said, his voice strong. "You have the right to demand respect. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The students erupted in applause, their voices rising in a chorus of support. Lena and Marco felt a swell of pride as they stood beside their father, knowing that they had sparked a change that was bigger than themselves. But the fallout was not over. The school board convened to discuss the incidents, and the pressure mounted on Mr. Thompson to take action. The evidence against Tyler and his friends was overwhelming, and the board could no longer turn a blind eye. In a decisive move, they expelled Tyler and his crew, their reign of terror finally coming to an end. The news spread quickly, and the atmosphere at Stonebridge Prep began to shift once more. Lena and Marco returned to school after their suspension, greeted by a wave of support from their peers. The hallways, once filled with whispers of disdain, now buzzed with conversations of change. Students were standing up for one another, refusing to let bullying go unchecked any longer. As they walked through the halls, Lena and Marco felt a sense of empowerment. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger, their voices now part of a larger movement for justice. They had not only fought for themselves, but for every student who had ever felt powerless. They thought they could silence us forever, but now the echoes of our fight are reshaping the very foundation of Stonebridge Prep. As the dust settled from the fallout of the fight, Lena and Marco found themselves at the forefront of a new era at Stonebridge Prep. The expulsion of Tyler Winslow and his crew had sent shockwaves through the school, and the atmosphere was charged with a sense of possibility. Students who had once been silent now felt emboldened to speak out against bullying, and the tide of change was undeniable. The administration, faced with mounting pressure from both students and parents, began to implement new policies aimed at fostering a more inclusive environment. Anti-bullying workshops were scheduled, and the school's code of conduct was revised to ensure that every student felt safe and respected. Lena and Marco watched as their peers rallied together, their voices rising in unison to demand a better school culture. In the weeks that followed, the twins became symbols of resilience and courage. They were invited to speak at assemblies, sharing their story and encouraging others to stand up for themselves. "You don't have to fight with your fists," Lena told the crowd one day, her voice steady and strong. "You can fight with your words, your actions, and your refusal to be silenced." The response was overwhelming. Students approached them after each assembly, sharing their own experiences and thanking them for their bravery. The hallways, once filled with whispers of disdain, now buzzed with conversations of support and solidarity. Lena and Marco had ignited a spark that was spreading like wildfire. But the twins knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. They continued to face challenges, as some students clung to the old ways, resistant to the shift in power dynamics. A few of Tyler's former friends attempted to undermine the new atmosphere, spreading rumors and trying to instigate conflict. However, Lena and Marco stood firm, their resolve unshaken. They had faced the storm and emerged victorious, and they would not let anyone drag them back into the shadows. One afternoon, as they walked through the courtyard, they noticed a group of freshmen huddled together, looking anxious. Lena and Marco exchanged a glance, sensing an opportunity to help. They approached the group, introducing themselves and asking if everything was okay. The freshmen hesitated, but soon one of them spoke up. "There's a kid in our class who keeps picking on us," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena felt a surge of determination. "You don't have to put up with that," she said firmly. "We can help you. You have the right to feel safe at school." Marco nodded in agreement, his expression serious. "Let's talk to a teacher together. You shouldn't have to face this alone." The freshmen looked at each other, uncertainty in their eyes, but Lena and Marco's confidence was infectious. They agreed to approach a teacher, and the twins walked with them, ready to support their new friends. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They were not just fighting for themselves anymore. They were creating a ripple effect of change that would extend far beyond their own experiences. As the school year progressed, the changes at Stonebridge Prep became more pronounced. The administration took a proactive stance against bullying, implementing regular training for teachers on how to recognize and address harassment. Students were encouraged to report incidents without fear of retaliation, and a peer support group was established to provide a safe space for those who needed it. Lena and Marco felt a sense of pride as they watched their school transform. They had not only stood up for themselves, but had also paved the way for others to do the same. The whispers of disdain that had once followed them were now replaced by words of encouragement and respect. One day, as they sat beneath the old oak tree during lunch, Lena turned to Marco, a smile spreading across her face. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Marco nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's incredible. We didn't just change things for us. We changed things for everyone." Their father, Eduardo, had always taught them that true strength lies in standing up for what is right, and they had embraced that lesson wholeheartedly. They had faced the storm and emerged not just as survivors, but as leaders, guiding their peers toward a brighter future. As the school year came to a close, Lena and Marco reflected on their journey. They had fought against the odds, faced their fears, and emerged victorious. The battle was not just about them. It was about creating a legacy of strength and resilience for future generations of students at Stonebridge Prep. The twins knew that challenges would always arise, but they were ready to face them together. They had learned that true power comes from within, and they would continue to stand tall, unbroken, and unafraid. The echoes of their fight would resonate through the halls of Stonebridge. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next video. Feel free to share this video with others and check out more stories on our channel.